It would be no exaggeration to say that in the last 2 years alone, Korean storytelling has gone through something of a renaissance, at the very least in international appeal. This is of course part of the wider Korean wave that has seen the country's pop culture become increasingly integrated into that of Western audiences since the early 90s, and more so than ever today. But when Parasite hit domestic cinemas in 2019, few would have guessed that it would go on to win 4 Academy Awards, including the most coveted Best Picture, especially considering that in its opening weekend in the US, it was screened in only 3 theaters, and that the acclaimed director, Bong Joon-ho, had never directed a film that had broken more than $100 million at the box office. It really can't be understated how significant the Oscar sweep was for the continued success of the film in the West. The Associated Press reported the biggest Oscar effect since 2001, when Ridley Scott's Gladiator won Best Picture, and Parasite's box office revenue went on to increase by more than 230% compared to the week prior the awards. This mainstream recognition of what Korean filmmaking has to offer made the black comedy come thriller the first foreign language film ever to win Best Picture, and for many it would be the first South Korean film they had ever seen. Being candid, it was the first time I had seen one too, and it opened a window to movies like Oldboy and Train to Busan, films that match a slick Hollywood-style production to stories that are uniquely essential in the genre because they are influenced by, but not directly from, the West. Skipping just over a few years later, a Korean TV show is now breaking international records. Squid Game was, like Parasite, an unexpected left-field hit on Western shores, and such a hit internationally, in fact, that Netflix co-CEO Ted Sarandos said that shortly after its release, Squid Game became the #1 most-watched piece of content in the world on the platform, and that not only is it by far the most successful non-English language show, but it has a good chance of being the most watched in the platform's history. 2 major hits across 2 years, each arguably different in appeal, but with much between them that strikes similar if not matching chords, and with what I believe is a core message that both stories share. Both contain scenes of graphic violence and murder to varying degrees, and both have protagonists that are less than bastions of truth and decency, all accounted for. But I think the most important similarity is that the characters we most closely follow are each striving to escape circumstances in which they feel there is no escape, or at least in which, in order to escape, they turn to measures far more drastic than perhaps we in our relative comfort instinctively expect them to make. In order to make my point effectively here on out, there are major spoilers for both Parasite and Squid Game, so consider this point of no return time. We've all heard the old idiom that drastic times call for drastic measures, and both Parasite and Squid Game want you to realize that choices desperate people make when backed into a corner are not necessarily what we in our own shoes would believe that we would do. In Parasite, the movie ends with the father of the working-class Kim family, Kim Ki-taek, stabbing his middle-class equivalent in the Park family merely because of a repulsed reaction to the smell of someone else akin to his own background. In Squid Game, the contestants vote, as they are permitted, to prematurely end the deadly games in which they participate, and one would rightly perceive this as an odd turn for the series to take in its first couple of episodes. The traditional narrative element of peril races on until it is momentarily suspended, something very risky in storytelling considering that it so often lowers the stakes characters face, and anything that might be learned, gained, or indeed lost on a more meaningful journey falls so quickly from our grasp it might well be likened to sand. But Squid Game then does something very clever and central to the theme of this video. It makes us realize that even when fooled into participating in games that will almost certainly result in gruesome death, for many, that is the lesser of evils that include the world outside. Though many themes between the film and the show do cross over, the need to overcome poverty and strife are certainly those which most strongly link the two. While Parasite more directly compares the varying attitudes of rich and poor with the Park and Kim families respectively, Squid Game's underlying commentary is more nuanced, focusing on the sheer power that forces that have everything can impose on those who have nothing. or more specifically less than nothing, in that contestants are all in seemingly inescapable debt. Parasite's handling of interclass conflict is much more central to the plot and general story structure, whereas Squid Game has a top layer framed much more as it would be in your typical helping of genre fiction, with the game's perpetrated plans and contestants' evolving character arcs far more front and center than the shared theme of poverty and strife. Okay, next I want to talk about motivation, which is where the two stories really diverge. In Parasite, the Kim family are each, in the more comedic opening act of the film, nefarious in their attempts to infiltrate and leech off of the conspicuous wealth of the Park family. But this humorous tone changes when Kim Ki-taek kills Park Dong-ik out of little more than blind rage. It is because that instant of rage is brought about by how Park behaves in reaction to someone of Kim's background that the theme of social commentary comes full circle and lands upon a note which, when it does land, is stripped entirely of any kind of comedic shielding. We see, as Bong Joon-ho surely intends, the stark and naked horror of what both jealousy and equality does to us. It reverts us to our animal selves, makes us full of want and doubt, and fueled by instinct. Squid Game, however, though it may not seem so readily imaginable, is actually even more cynical. We learn at the end of the series not that the games are about contestants being equal, as Frontman alludes when slaying several of his men who interfere with the proceedings, but rather that our key perpetrator, Oh Nam, simply saw the contestants as intelligent and entertaining racehorses on which to bet. He was not trying to cultivate any kind of commentary, as the show does in the larger sphere of its influence. He was simply a man who made so much money that, evidently, there was not even any joy left in giving it away. His selfishness, of course, hardly ended there, determining that in order to feel young again, the lives of others were worth the cost, a choice we can all agree, as a character, makes him that which these works that lean into societal commentary are really rallying against. Oh Nam, symbolically, is who we are really talking about in all this. His greed, his apathy, which, in speaking of, is of course to speak of higher powers not only in Korea, but the wider world. I should note, of course, that if one were to ask, are Parasite and Squid Game really comparable as forms of media? Well, not really. Though each touch upon the same key theme, they are also thematically different and completely different tonally. Squid Game is primarily a drama series, and Parasite is best described as a black comedy that gradually evolves into a thriller. What connects them are down-and-out characters who are desperate for the break on which they'll free themselves of the circumstances that bind them to a life of grind, servitude, and mediocrity. They want more for themselves and more for their families, and what makes these works such great complementary pieces of art to compare is that in a kind of duality between them, we see the pressures from below as well as from above. The Kim family, being demoralizingly poor, succumb to greed, and out of this, enviably affluent but ultimately innocent people are murdered. In Squid Game, one man with enough money to start his own Hunger Games, or as we might say, 2000s Battle Royale if we're staying true to Korea's cultural origins, pits life against life for nothing more than entertainment. That is, if we are to believe the confessionary monologue at the end of the series. Bear in mind that the season has been filmed in such a way that it would be complete as a limited run, or could be expanded further. Both Netflix and the show's director, Hwang Dong-yuk, remain at the time of writing this script tight-lipped on the subject. What I think makes the reveal at the end of Squid Game all the more alarming amorally is that if there really was no other motivation for Oh Nam than boredom, wishing to feel young again at the expense of more desperate people's lives, the rule by which the games end with majority rule is in fact the most insidious element of the game's construction. It is in such a case designed simply as a reminder to contestants that as free as they might believe themselves, they are not, and thus it strips them of the fight to escape and keeps them focused on the game at hand. perhaps even more pertinently, it brings them closer to the nature of its rules, where by eliminating their fellows, they come ever closer to the life-changing prize money. Ultimately, the message these two forms of media share is that inequality is not simply about the haves and the have-nots. It's about how it warps our perceptions of self-worth, our perceptions of meaning and culture and society, and our perceptions of each other. The longer and more prevalently we allow those perceptions to drift from what makes us human, the closer we are to becoming the real-world mirrors of either Kim Ki-taek